Thank you for joining me on this edition of Perspective 254. My name is Ajaletia Kesa. In a modern parable, reminiscent of the biblical Tower of Babel, where the unity of purpose was shattered by the confusion of tongues, the administration of President William Ruto finds itself in a similarly discordant situation. For those of you wenye hamwendangi kanisa and you're not familiar with the story, basically it speaks of humanity's attempts to build a tower reaching out to the heavens, only to be thwarted by God, who introduced a multiplicity of languages among the builders, resulting in chaos and misunderstanding. This narrative mirrors the current state of Kenya's governance under the Kenya Kwanza regime, where the noble ambition of a harmonized government is continuously undermined by conflicting communications and authoritative discord among the top officials in the government. It is like they're playing a game of telephone and no one can seem to figure out whose turn it is next. Now, President William Ruto's administration is again facing mounting scrutiny in the wake of a state of conflicting information from government and intense competition for authority and control by top officials. It is almost like watching a reality TV show where everyone is fighting for the same exact roles. Now, in recent times, the Kenya Kwanza government has witnessed a series of unsettling and conflicting and sometimes redundant statements from top government officials, exposing infighting and insubordination. President William Ruto's administration is again facing mounting scrutiny in the wake of a spate of conflicting information from government and intense competition for authority and control by top officials in the government. It is almost like watching a reality TV show where everyone is fighting for the same exact roles. Now, in recent times, the Kenya Kwanza government has witnessed a series of unsettling, conflicting, and sometimes redundant statements from top government officials within the government circles, exposing infighting and insubordination in the government. Cabinet secretaries and principal secretaries have been caught up in the blame game, usurpation, and encroachment into each other's ministries, with each issuing contradicting pronouncements on various issues. Perhaps they need a map to navigate the maze of mixed messages going on in there. In November of 2022, Cabinet Secretary Moses Kuria, then in the trade docket, announced the government had made a tough call to allow duty-free importation of 10 million bags of GMO maize in the country over the next 6 months to address the biting food crisis in the country. This was the time when he made this famous statement about how there are a million things in Kenya that could kill you. So why not add GMO onto that list? Well, that's one way to look at it. That's one way to look at the bright side of things. Days later, Agriculture Cabinet Secretary Muthika Vinturi, the guy who's now under siege for possible impeachment proceedings from Parliament, distanced his ministry from this planned importation, saying he is the only one mandated to make such an announcement. In May of 2023, Mr. Kuria again, this guy is one loose cannon for sure, called for the military invasion of Sudan to end the ongoing war, saying the community of nations should militarily invade any country where the armies overthrow the government. That's Mr. Kuria. Now, the statement forced Foreign Affairs Principal Secretary Dr. Korir Sing'oei to come out to say the tweet by Mr. Kuria did not reflect the government's position on the matter. Months earlier, Mr. Kuria again had also caused a storm by calling for the shutdown of the China Square Mall amid a row with the local traders. Again, PS Sing'oei was forced to calm any uproar from the Chinese government, asserting that no lawful investment actor, whatever their nationality, should be apprehensive about discrimination in Kenya. Now, between plain policeman and firefighter, Mr. Sing'oei must be earning a lot of frequent flyer miles from putting out all these diplomatic fires thanks to Mr. Kuria. Now, this worrying trend has cast doubt on the much heralded one government approach being championed by the current regime since August of last year, signaling a return of the Kenya Kwanza's Tower of Babel, witnessed at the infancy of this government. The latest development comes after a series of unsettling communications from the Kenya Kwanza government regarding the opening of schools for the second term, as well as a response to the ongoing raging floods. The recent unfolding comes at a time when Kenyans are grappling with the hardships of floods, economic struggles, and the doctors' strike. On Friday, the Ministry of Education released a circular issuing guidelines to parents, education officials, and institutions ahead of the scheduled reopening of schools on Monday, May 6, 2024. Now, the circular, signed by Education Cabinet Secretary Ezekiel Mashogu, indicated that parents and school management would be responsible for the safety of learners when schools reopen for the second term. Now, the schools were set to reopen for the second term on April 29th before the same was postponed on May 6th and subsequently put on hold until further notice due to the ongoing rains that have resulted in raging floods which have claimed at least 228 lives in Kenya. Mr. Mushogu directed field education officers working in areas where schools hosted displaced persons to liaise with local national government administration officials to immediately identify alternative accommodation for the displaced persons and ensure that facilities were available for normal learning activities for the students. But hours later, in his State of the Nation address, President William Ruto set aside the communication from his ministry by directing the ministry to indefinitely postpone schools reopening. Mr. Ruto said the Ministry of Education is directed to postpone the dates of reopening of schools in the country for the second term until further notice. Interestingly, reports indicate that the president had actually chaired a cabinet meeting a day before the issuance of this circular that endorsed the reopening of schools on May 6th. Maybe it was just a really, really good meeting and everyone forgot what they agreed on the next day. Whatever we talked about yesterday, forget that. More confusion also has been witnessed earlier in the week when CS Moshogu released a statement on Sunday midnight announcing the postponement of schools reopening for a week. Now, this communication, which caught many parents unawares as it came when some had already released their children to go to school, came a few days after the Basic Education Principal Secretary Belio Kipsang had maintained that the second term would resume as planned. The Principal Secretary had directed school managers not to send back home learners who had reported to school prior to the circular by his boss. But that is not all. On Sunday, both the Ministry of Interior and National Administration and Office of the Government Spokesperson, an office under the Executive Office of the President, released almost a similar statement regarding an update on the ongoing flood menace in Kenya. The statement, which came minutes before 11 a.m., also detailed the government's intervention, including response preparedness, search and rescue efforts, and recovery. And then, less than an hour later, the government spokesperson, Mr. Isaac Mwaura, took to the lectern at the steps of Nyayo House to repeat similar statistics as contained in the statement by the Interior Ministry. Now, the latest developments follow another confusion over a recently gazetted team by Transport Cabinet Secretary Mr. Kipchumba Murkomen to investigate air crashes in the country in the last 3 years with recommendations to improve aviation safety in Kenya. This ambiguous gazette notice caused confusion on whether the team will also look into the helicopter crash that claimed the life of the Chief of Defense Forces, General Francis Ogola, and 9 other military officers. The muddle forced the CS to come out and clarify that his ministry is only involved in investigating crashes involving civilian aircraft, and the team's scope will not extend to military aircraft accidents. As the biblical Tower of Babel stands as a testament of the dangers of unchecked ambition and disunity, so too does the ongoing turmoil within President William Ruto's administration serve as a cautionary tale for us as a country. The continual public contradictions and power struggles among high-ranking officials not only jeopardizes the government's ability to function efficiently, but also erodes public trust in the government. This chaotic communication, much like the scattered efforts of Babel's builders, threatens the very foundation of Kenya's leadership structure, urging a recalibration towards unity and a clear, concerted government to avoid the fate of those ancient architects whose dreams were lost in translation. This has been Perspective 254. Thanks for watching. Cheers.